Project Herpetoculture, interviewing Randy Gray, or Randall. Would you prefer Randy, Randall? Do you have a preference?
Randy.
Randy
Randy.
Gray. Thank you again. Just so folks know, this is the book that you put out. I know it's backwards on the. It says Desert Lizards, captive husbandry and management, or propagation rather, by Randall L. Gray. That's that book. I read that. I think I read your book when I was like 17 or 18 years old, I think. And it was it was one of the books that I first got to when I started keeping Uromastyx. So thank you for putting it out there. A lot of the work you did back in the day kind of paved the way for a lot of us working with desert reptiles now. So thank you for that. And thanks for coming on the show to chat.
Well, you're more than welcome. And I'm looking forward to this.
Me too. Me too. So the way I want to start is for folks who might not know, could you just describe a little bit about how you fit into herpetoculture, generally speaking? And then I'd also wrapped up in that, I'd also like to know a little bit about how herpetoculture, or how reptiles and amphibians first kind of came into your life for you.
Okay. Now, how do I put 75 years into a couple of minutes here?
Yeah.
I was thinking about that this morning, and my first recollection of really starting to get an interest in lizards was about 1956. I remember my mother dropping me off at this old abandoned place. It was back in the day where parents felt comfortable doing that. And we used to ride in the back of pickups with no seatbelts. It was a different world back in the early 50s. But I would go out there and try to catch bluebellies. Unless they changed the name, that was Scalopus occidentalis, Western fence lizard. But taxonomy keeps changing. So I remember grabbing those, maybe bringing one home. Probably had no idea what they ate or how they took care of it. I was just a little kid. And then in a few, the years went on, and maybe in my early teens, going to state fairs and buying chameleons, which were anoles. They would sell them on a string and a safety pin, and you buy them, and they would give you a packet of look like turtle food, to feed these anoles lizards. At the time I go, oh, you just put it in water and the lizards, feed, and that's real convenient. And maybe then somewhere in that time you could go into these old drugstores, and they might have a big table with plastic up on the sides, and it'd be full of turtles or horned lizards.
Okay.
Things were sold a lot differently and much more available back then. And I would venture to say there weren't a whole lot of laws protecting reptiles and amphibians or managing if they're collected or not collected.
Sure.
So that takes me into my mid-teens in the 60s. And what I remarkable about that is my parents let me build a room in the garage, a small room, and it was my snake room. And I filled that up with snakes. And so then 17, 18 came along, and I started college and went through the 70s, the late 60s and 70s, going to college, trying to get my degree. And I would say this, my interest in lizards and snakes and everything else that was alive led me to choose my career, which led me to choose my academic training, which was a couple degrees in biology. So though I didn't major in herpetology, I majored in ecology biology, and I took a class in herpetology and hung out at the Herp Museum and used to go and collect specimens for the museum. So I had this involvement, but interestingly, Robert Stebbins, you familiar with him? He wrote the Western Guide to Reptiles and Amphibians.
Okay,
He's a real famous herpetologist. He's been passed away for many, many years, but he wrote the field guide to Western reptiles and amphibians. And I wrote him a letter in the mid-1960s and said I wanted to grow up and be a herpetologist just like him. And he wrote back, that was the days before computers, and typed me a letter and said, I don't think you should try to get a career in herpetology because there's very few jobs available. And so what I recommend is you get a wider training in wildlife conservation, wildlife management. Then you can find employment.
Okay.
Which is what I did. So I focused on a bigger field to be more broader in my opportunities for employment. And years later, in the 80s, I met Harry Green for the first time, another well-known famous herpetologist in the United States. And he was Dr. Stebbins' graduate student. And
Okay.
he said, yeah, he told me, gave me the same advice, but I didn't follow it. So, and he became, as one, like I said, one of the most well-known herpetologists in the United States.
Sure.
So the 70s were taken up with that, but I always had lizards at home. We'd go to the desert. I bring home chuckwallas or desert iguanas, or I go to the Great Basin Desert because I grew up in the Central Valley of Sacramento area. I go over to Nevada and we would chase lizards and catch. So I always had lizards around, trying, really wasn't working on the propagation. Then in the 80s came, I moved to Davis and my job, and I met other people. Before then, I didn't know a lot of people that were in the reptile world.
Okay.
Friends would come with me because it was interesting, but there weren't any what I would call old school herpers with me at the time. But in the 80s, that changed. And that's when I met another friend, and we established the Northern California Herpetological Society,
Mhm.
which a lot of people that were founding members were students at the UC Davis, including veterinarians, and
Mhm.
went on, and some of them are well known for their specialty in reptile medicine. But
Amazing.
anyway, so it was fun. We created an organization. In that organization, we'd bring in good speakers. So I started meeting the broader herpetological community, some of the old schoolers, as we refer them to.
Hmm.
And we then had the great idea, because a lot of us, some they were in college, I was working. We started almost an annual conference on the captive propagation of reptiles,
Mm.
and we brought people in from all over the country, and we had proceedings that still are around. I see them surface every now and then. So we began putting together symposia that a day long that focused on captive propagation and husbandry, and that gave our organization, Northern California Herp Society, to be well known at that time. And then it created links for me to be more involved in the herp world, because the next thing I know, I started meeting people that worked in zoos. I was asked to help organize a couple conferences for the International Herp Symposium back in the 60s.
Hmm.
I think the one in San Diego and the one in San Antonio, Texas, I helped organize those. Um, and so that took me to another level
Hmm.
of being more engaged. And all this time, my career is following me. It's biology, it's parallel, but it's actually was my passion, and
Hmm.
through all those years. And then I moved and lived in some remote areas for 5 years, didn't have reptiles, and then ended up in Washington, D.C. So I took about an 8 year break. And then when I came back to a regional office in Texas, I got into uromastics. And uromastics, I don't know what attracted me. I remember getting a group of Moroccan uromastics at the time, adults,
Hmm.
and I was impressed. And then all of a sudden, it seemed to be that uromastics were coming in. And I don't remember how any data that they were coming in much before the low 90s, but
Hmm.
that's when ornate started showing up, and I grabbed some and bred them along with Yemenensis. And I remember when the first mollies came in the United States, and I bred them.
Amazing.
Um, I'm thinking there's another species that I, Yemens, mollies, ornates, and
Jitsu.
Moroccans.
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 Okay.
So I started breeding them a lot, and once again got me involved. And I started going to shows in Orlando. Some of those were some of the early expos in the early 90s.
Hmm.
I don't think they had been around. Shows hadn't been around much longer before that. There might have been I remember there were some swap meets and things like that in different
Sure.
herp groups around the country. But I recollect, and a historian would be much better at answering this, including, as a matter of fact, a gentleman named Mike Berger is,
Mm.
which I reviewed a few chapters, has written a book on the history of herpetoculture that'll probably come out next summer. He's trying to get it at the 50th International Herpetological Symposium, ready to be available
Oh,
in Rodeo, New Mexico,
oh,
which
that's
is,
amazing.
yeah, so he's hopefully his book will come out then. It goes over the history of herpetoculture. So anyway, so I spent the 90s pretty much doing that, and then I moved to a remote area on a ranch because I was able to telecommute, but more importantly, I was flying a lot. But eventually, I put together another little collection to play.
Yeah.
So reptiles were a big part of my life, always have been. Led me into my career as a wildlife biologist.
That's amazing. There's a lot of I have a lot of questions, but I want to mention I am very excited for that history of herpetoculture book. That I feel like I'm going to be the first person to buy that, and I'll read it. And
Yeah,
if you can, I don't know if he's open to doing podcasts, but if you would be willing to put me in touch with him, I'd love to talk with him on the
Yeah,
show.
I will. I'll connect with him and see if he's up to that,
Okay.
and then give you his contact information.
Phenomenal. Thank you. I appreciate that. So one question that came up for me while you were while you were talking about how your some of your history is it had the sort of wildlife and ecological side of your interests always overlapped with the captive propagation, and additionally, did it seem to be that the people you would meet in your pursuits were similar to you and that they did both? Part of the reason I ask is because right now it seems like, even though I still meet plenty of people who are a mix of the two, where they work with wild herps and they also keep, it does seem like there's a lot of people who kind of do one or the other, where there's a lot of individuals who might be focused on conservation who have a negative view of herpetoculture broadly. I'm curious if you know what you say to that.
Well, sort of all of the above. I would say the vast majority of people that I worked with on my professional side of my life and my volunteer, because I was a volunteer for a lot of conservation organizations, being on their boards and stuff, particularly after I retired.
Mm-hmm.
But keeping reptiles was not their thing.
Okay.
Uh, I wouldn't know. Many of them ever did any herping,
Okay.
but unless it was just part of their biological work and they were out in the field. So, is there yes, there are people that have pure thoughts about animals should not be in captivity that are professional biologists, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's a lot of people that don't believe, are against hunting, and a lot of the people in the wildlife community hunt, but not everybody hunts. So there's always these fractions of views about and perspectives how we should be towards animals. But no, to get to answer your question, no, the majority of people I work with were not into herpetology. I was on the national committee of the Partners for Amphibian Reptile Conservation, representing the agency I worked with. And so I met other people that had a focus on reptiles in
Mm-hmm.
conservation. And we kind of worked in some of the early projects I was involved in, was putting together habitat management guidelines for different regions of the country, to how to a landowner could make modifications to his habitat, or just not modify certain pieces of that habitat to make them better. And I mentioned, I think before we came on, um, I dedicated my life to one program, a huge, probably the largest wetland restoration and easement program in the world at the time. And I think it probably still more or less is. But I was helping in the formulation of that program and marketing. But I ended up doing a lot of training around the country. And if I would have a workshop, let's say, trying to come up with a real city, now it's been so long, Spokane, Washington. And we talked about how to restore wetlands, and I would bring in the experts of how to restore those areas and put them back. I'd always try to get a herpetologist to come in and talk about what could they do when they restore the wetland to benefit reptiles and amphibians. And a real simple example, temporary water areas, because fish are not a good thing for larvae of amphibians. So you needed some shallow temporal wetland areas that flooded and dried up, so fish couldn't survive in them. But they would flood up during the rains and thus provide habitat for frogs and salamanders. So we tried to incorporate that kind of training into just regular everyday people that, they would see a snake and hopefully they weren't afraid of it or something, but
Sure.
it was their interest was they're getting their job done to restore that habitat for the vast variety of animals that wetlands provide habitat to.
Mm.
So, no, the majority of people I work with in my career were not herp people. They might have been bird people, they might have been mammal people.
Okay.
They all come from different backgrounds.
Yeah.
There's very few people that really work in the field of like herpetology 100% of their time. Which is what Robert Stebbins advised me in the mid 60s. You need to have a broader education in wildlife conservation so you can find employment, and employment's important.
Tell me about it. Interesting. Okay. And so, additionally, you mentioned founding a herp society and sort of organizing some uh, talks or symposiums of that kind. Was that something that you did out of uh, not to be critical of it at all, but like a more selfish interest? Was that like, I just want more people to talk to about this, or was it a little bit more altruistic in the sense that you felt like it was something of value because you saw enough people who were interested in it and you thought, well, I'm an industrious person, why don't I go for it?
Maybe both. I
Okay.
think it was good to bring people together that we shared a common interest and got to, be in a circle of friends. They understood you. They knew
Yeah.
why you drove the road until 3 a.m. looking for snakes and stuff. So
Yeah.
they got it.
Yeah.
And so there was some of that. But one thing that I felt was always important to me,
Uh-huh.
I did teach college part time for 7 years while I was doing my job, taught wildlife management at a community college. And I enjoy educating people,
Mm.
and especially when it comes to wildlife conservation, habitat conservation. And the other thing that was always important to me, and it from that very beginning in the early 80s all the way through the 90s, was helping educate others how to take care of animals so we wouldn't have these animals lingering in captivity and dying.
Yeah.
And that's why, I wrote the book. I put everything I knew in that one chapter about uromastyx, all pretty much came from my personal experience with a few people in Europe that were breeding uromastyx at the time. And I
Yeah.
was getting information, quoting their papers. But I also wrote, every time was, I don't like to say I was the first to breed the species because I don't know that. All I can say is I know I was the first to publish about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is a totally different world. A lot of people just aren't into writing articles and don't want to do that. So I wrote for Reptiles magazine, and I every other month for Vivarium I ran more of an article on old school herpers that were some of the big people in the business, like the Parkers and Bert Langeworf
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
Bob Mayu, all friends of mine. So all those people I would write articles about, but I did publish one or two uromastyx articles in Vivarium, but I think most of my were in Reptiles magazine. And I share that because it was important for me to tell people exactly what I was doing to help them better the hobby, but
Yeah. Yeah.
also an ethical thing. I like animals, as we all do,
Yeah.
and there's nothing worse than me going into, like I did the other day, to one of those big market pet stores and seeing a panther chameleon there, and I'm looking, do
Oh,
they have the right lights? You kind of, it's
yeah.
not, the people don't know. They're
Yeah.
working there. They're not reptile people.
Right.
And so I hope my education, helping others educate, would lead to better. So, I never thought of it as altruistic until not
Yeah.
ego. I never thought about it. Did I do that for myself? But looking back, that's a good point. I really enjoyed being around and talking to other people about reptiles.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I feel like that's the reason I even started the podcast. Is just I just want to have more interesting conversations with people about herpetoculture, and I didn't start it thinking, oh, this will be great for other people to be interested and learn and feed their own minds. It was just like, no, this is like a good excuse to talk to people like you and to other people who I want to just pick their brain about this whole thing. And um, some of the value add kind of presented itself after the fact. So it's just, I always find it interesting because I think sometimes people can post rationalize their decisions in a way that can make them seem more laudable. you know
Sure.
what, you know what I'm saying? And
We all reinvent our story.
yeah, yeah, yeah. That's a really good way of putting it. Yeah. I mean, so uh, when was the first time you might say that you recognized that there were people doing this sort of thing as a living, herpetoculture in particular? Because you mentioned writing articles about Bob Mayu and Bert Langerwerf and the Parkers and whatnot. So was that, did you find out about those people and realize they were running it as a business operation, or did you see that evolve?
I think I saw that evolve because in the 60s, obviously, I said I was really isolated. And there were some people that had big collections, and there were definitely a lot of importers. Because I remember writing, because back in those days, remember, we didn't have cell phones, we didn't
Right.
text, we didn't have email. I remember writing letters to a lot of the exporters in Florida to get their price list of the different animals they had available. So other than importers and pet shops, I wasn't aware of people making a living or supplementing their income.
Mm-hmm.
But in the 80s, I started meeting people that were definitely supplementing their income.
Mm-hmm.
And I remembered telling somebody that you could walk into their house and they would have a whole rack of sweater boxes or shoe boxes, with a little slide in thing,
Sure.
and that they were making many thousands of dollars a year selling all these things.
Yeah.
And I thought that was eye opening to me. And I said, why is it I like lizards? Because you can't put them in, for the most part, you don't put them in a shoebox or sweater box. You need better habitats than that.
Yeah.
And but I liked lizards. So I think it was in the 80s when I started seeing people become more involved. Like I watched Bob Mayhew when we used to be friends. We toured a bunch of reptile facilities in California once. He flew up to see me in Northern California, and we drove down and visited a lot of the people that were well known for breeding their animals at the time.
Yeah.
And I watched Bob evolve into a businessman. First he was, I don't know his history real well because I'm forgetting. It's been decades. But, I remember him breeding a lot of White's tree frogs. But then he got into bearded dragons. Mm-hmm. And I would say Bob was one of the bigger and definitely the first person I ever knew to breed all those morphs.
Oh, yeah.
Come up with those Sandfire Dragons, I think his old company name was.
Yeah.
So that was when I started seeing things in the 90s that, yes, there's a lot of people. I went to Dave and the Parkers and was impressed by they were breeding, all the snakes they were breeding and making a living out of doing it.
Yeah.
And by Dave and Tracy, I think Dave and I think Tracy was too, they're both biologists. Yeah. So, and I know Dave worked on I'm pretty sure worked on one of these montane rattlesnakes that are protected here in the southwestern United States. Mm-hmm. So you started meeting a lot of interesting people, and not a lot, but some of those people were biologists that decided instead of pursuing a career like I did within, state and federal agencies, which is where most of the jobs are. You're either in academia or you're a state and federal agency when you're a biologist. Sure. Or consulting firms would be another choice. They decide, hey, I'm going to take all this training and knowledge and love that I have for reptiles, and I'm going to make a living out of it. And they did. And, Ron Trumper, when I first met Ron, he was the director of the Fresno reptile house back, and that was real early 80s. Soon to be replaced by another person that became good friends with, was Sean McEwen, who came over from the Hawaii Zoo there. And by the way, Sean McEwen is the person he got me to, because he edited or was an editor for Vivarium magazine. So he's always reached out to me and got me involved with that, got me involved with putting together the symposiums. Mm. And going back to it, that question about, did I help put those things together for myself to meet other people or, for altruistic reasons? I would say with Sean, it was a measure of both, that I enjoyed organizing things and I was good at putting conferences together. So I would take care of the details. So I think that's why I got pulled into a lot of stuff and then enjoyed and was enriched by it. But yeah, going back to the question at hand, I think it was the 90s when I started, really 80s when I began, and the 90s things started doors opening. Now, when I look around me, I went to Tinley here last spring, just to see what that was like, see the evolution in herpetoculture. And I was pretty much blown away.
Yeah.
It was huge. All of the diversity of things that are being bred now, the morphs that are being bred now. There were things there that I never even heard of, or big, I go like, what's that? So it was really cool. But that's the other thing that I've seen in my life in the reptile world. We went from a reptile world where there wasn't an industry of building cages and foods and all those things. And I still do this to a degree, you go to the hardware store and walk around and have an idea about how you could build a cage and what you could use. And, so it was like making it up as you go. Maybe go to a friend's house and say, oh, that was cool how he set his animals up. So maybe I'll try to incorporate that. But as you well know, now there's whole industries. There's companies that do nothing but produce food and lights and
Sure.
heat lamps and uh, all kinds of really beautiful cages,
Yeah, yeah.
wonderful cages. So there, yeah, that's big has been a big change, particularly I think in the last 30 years, 25 to 30 years. There's
Mm.
been a big explosion. And I don't think a lot of people know how big of an industry reptiles and amphibians are, as there is, I imagine, too, in the aquarium field and stuff. So there's other adventures, but we all live in small worlds. Most people have no idea. If I were to take the average person I know around where I live now and have taken him with the Tinley with me, it
Yeah.
would have been, to me, it was a mind blower because so much advance had been done in all these years. But to
Yeah.
them, it was like, this world even exists.
Yeah, 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 yeah. There's a lot of those little bizarre, uh, these whole universes where people don't know that there's just this, there's like a center of gravity and um, institutional bodies and companies and billions of dollars that move through a particular industry every year, and it might be one you've never heard of. It's always an eye opener. I see that in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. That's one of those things where I still meet people all the time who've never even heard of it, and it's like
Mm-hmm.
this is a massive, massive global
Mm-hmm.
phenomenon. Like I can't believe
Yeah.
you've never heard of it. And it's interesting. You mentioned a little bit there, and then also a little bit when we were talking before recording that you recently went to the Phoenix Reptile Expo.
Yes.
And you brought a friend, and you were amazed by how much you saw there, the sort of the diversity that you saw
Right.
available. And I feel like this might be a little bit contrary to what we tend to hear because, all too often you see, it's quite trendy and interesting when people post like an import list from the 90s. And they're like, look at all the
Yeah.
stuff we had, right?
Yeah.
And now we just don't have it. It's all bearded dragons and ball pythons. But I feel like it's not really true because I haven't been in it for as long as you have, but I remember even being 16 years old, going into the local shop here in Colorado, Reptilian Haven, which was probably the first reptile shop in the state. And there was a lot of cool, weird stuff, but it wasn't it was half the species diversity that you can find now,
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so you feel like it was, could you give me, maybe, if you don't mind, maybe offering a few examples of some things where you're like, never saw that before, and how you think all that's changed?
Well, first of all, after a hiatus of about 15 years, because I was just traveling so much around the country, I didn't have to take care of animals. My wife was a school teacher, and I couldn't saddle her with all the babysitting. But in that period, I took a break from about 2000 when I moved to New Mexico as my base station because I still worked around the country and moved around the country after that, but kept the home I built there until just real recently when we had to move into the city. Um, I saw a huge change from the year 1999 to 2015, I think, when I got back. When I got back in, I didn't so much work with uromastics. I was working more with a lot of small monitors. I wanted to try to do something different.
Mm-hmm.
And I was amazed at the changes. I remember their friends now that run the Rodeo Museum. He also puts together the Tinley Show and Bob Ashley, and he does other business. His whole business, he makes a living.
Yeah.
In the reptile world, selling books, selling all kinds of different equipment companies that he's bought into, and putting those shows together. And I went into, and they have all these reptile books, which is really cool.
Mm-hmm.
And I see all these books on ball pythons, and I had no idea that was a thing. I had no idea. 15 years, there was I don't remember ever seeing a ball python, but then I wasn't snake world focused. And all of a sudden, there's books about all these different morphs. And then people that I used to know way back, like Ron Tremper, had all these different morphs of leopard geckos. Yeah. And then when I went to Tinley, I remember walking by some tables with these different pythons. And I'm not talking, I remember when the first albino Burmese python came in the United States. I think it was in the mid 80s, might have been early 80s.
Mm-hmm.
And how that to me was, whoa, wow, an albino. There's actually animal snakes that can be like that. And then that led to a whole market of, lots of people getting in on the bandwagon and trying to breed albinos.
Yeah.
And then apparently that carried over eventually into lots of other things. And I do remember looking at a bunch of pythons, and there were all these different morphs of pythons, and they were beautiful. And I remember sitting there, the vendor was looking at me, he says, "What do you think?" And I go, "Wow, I don't think I've ever seen." I'm kind of into the natural look. It's just who I am. I mean,
Sure.
I've seen a lot of reptiles in the wild around the world, and so I like the natural look. And I've never really focused on morphs.
Yeah.
Not that I'm criticizing morphs, but I mean, it just wasn't what I did or did do.
Sure.
And I was sort of fascinated by it. And he just said, "Well, tell you what, I'll take $1,000 off the price right now of that snake so you can take it home." And I said, "I don't need a 30-foot snake eventually in my house. I'm not sure what I would do with that." And my wife would be very upset with me. But I digress. What I was just amazed at the beauty. It really kind of washed over me. It wasn't an albino. It was whatever all you geneticists that are out there breeding things for. It was just a gorgeous looking living organism.
Yeah.
And so those are the things. Now, I still see a lot of, and I think the market has come and gone.
Yeah.
I still saw a lot of ball pythons, lots of different bearded dragons, and some of the smaller geckos, leopard geckos was the main ones that I've seen. But I see that people have focused on even more obscure species over time. Like members of, I may have known the genus, but I wasn't that familiar with all the Phelsuma. And then I saw some of the Phelsuma in the Tinley show that amazed me. I go, and I used to know, still know, and I wrote an article about Tim Teitel. He authored one of the chapters in my book because I had two other co-authors. His was on more arid land geckos, and he always dealt and still does breed very obscure species to me that I had never even heard of.
Yeah.
So there's just that diversity of broadening. What I remember most about Orlando, and this is probably a memory that's clouded with opinions over the years, I remember a lot of corn snakes, a lot of king snakes. Yeah, those were the big things. People were breeding in different morphs of doing that. And coming up with those seemed to dominate. And I remember I started seeing Uromastyx, but they were all wild caught. And I go back, every Uromastyx I ever had started with was wild caught. Had to be. There were very few people. I know there was Terry Thatcher in Great Britain that was breeding, and I was in correspondence with him, was breeding, I think it was Moroccan. It's been so long, but he was breeding one species of Uromastyx at the time. But there weren't a lot of people around. And so pretty much with all the animals we have, they all have to start from wild-caught ancestors in order to be brought into the market. And people have asked me over the years, well, do you think captive propagation is really helping with the conservation of animals? And I have a different opinion than some. A lot of people think the fact that they're breeding them, they're holding them in their cages and stuff, that they're adding to the conservation. Well, I kind of like my reptiles in the wild as far as where I want my populations to be healthy, viable populations. And that has a lot to do with habitat loss and other things. It's a whole nother discussion. That was what my career was about.
Sure.
But it's having the enjoyment of those animals close at hand, that they would appreciate them and maybe train others not to be fearful of animals, maybe not run over every rattlesnake that crosses the road when you're driving out at night. But what I would say, why would anybody smuggle a bearded dragon out of Australia, which has been illegal for many, many, many years? Why would you bother smuggling it when you can? I've bred bearded dragons. I've hatched hundreds of them in the past.
Yeah.
There's no reason for people to collect a lot of wild things anymore. And if going back to Uromastyx, sort of the one thing that you and I both have in common, that was my hope too, is that more and more Uromastyx would be bred in captivity, which there are, and stop the need for importation.
Yeah.
Because, a lot of people, and I see it on all the Facebook groups, they go to a show like one of these I just mentioned, and they see a beautiful, bright orange or bright yellow Saharan Uromastyx, and they want to take it home. I get it.
Oh
I
yeah.
mean, I mean, that animal's gorgeous, but you know as well as I do, that animal has had a very long journey to
Yeah.
getting to that. And it probably wasn't a positive journey. Probably wasn't eating, wasn't being hydrated because it couldn't eat. They were not kept at proper temperatures. They were probably boxed up.
Crowded.
And I go back to the 90s. I remember one of the importers got in a big shipment of ornates, and though I had bought a couple from him and recovered them, got through the process and helped establish them,
Mm-hmm.
he sent me a bunch. I want to think 10 or 15 that were in sad shape, and I tried to keep those alive, and I would think I was successful with maybe two or
Yeah.
three because they were in such rugged shape by the time I got them.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of like to see that become less and less and less,
Yeah.
that we do have more captive propagation. Now, people on these sites, they say, don't buy anything but captive propagated animals. Well, nobody's listening to that because most people come to those sites after they acquired one. And I see that all the time. Hey, I just came home this weekend with this Uromastyx. And by the way, they don't break them out into species. It's sort of like this general topic, Uromastyx, like they're all the same. And as you know, they're different. They have different habitat requirements. I mean, a lot of their husbandry is right on the same line. I mean, you can't really go wrong. But they're all. How many? You remind me. How many is there? 18 species? What is it?
Yeah, it's about 18, depending on how the subspecies divisions are split
right.
up. Yeah,
so there's lots of different species, but they don't know that. All they know is a Uromastyx.
Yeah, right.
And how is it? An Egyptian Uromastyx are going to get way big, or is it a Thomasii that's going to be a little smaller?
Yeah.
They don't know what the expectation is with an animal they buy, and I kind of like what I know you do. And you spend a lot of time doing public education, which is why I admire you. And I think I probably told you that in the past. I've talked to you about getting more and more information out. And as you did on your really deep dive into Uromastyx care a couple of weeks ago, 2 hours, I think it was a little over 2 hours.
Yeah.
I had to take a coffee break in there, I think, but
yeah, so did I.
But excuse me, I also have a non-reptile animal. Cheeto. My wife might be coming back.
Sure.
I have a corgi over here that doesn't mind me as much as my German short hairs. Come here, Cheeto. Corgis have their own mind. The one thing different about reptiles, they don't give me lip as much as dogs do.
Yeah, man, those little corgis, those little loaves of bread will really talk back to you.
Yeah, it's a great dog, but sometimes she's demanding. She knows what she wants, and she's really smart, which bothers me. Sometimes I wonder if we're on the same plane of intelligence,
Yeah, it's a fair question. It's funny that you mentioned the way people broadly apply the Uromastyx label. Like I've had a non-insignificant number of people who come to me and say, oh, hey, I have a Uromastyx and I want to know if you can help me figure out if it's male or female, or figure out how to help it get better or whatever. And so again, I say, okay, like, sure, let's talk about it. Like, what do you have? And they're like, oh, it's just a regular Uromastyx. And I'm like, what does that mean? Like, I don't know. Exactly. It's not their fault, right? They don't know. No. So I'm always like, okay, well, listen, there's lots of different species. Send me a picture. I'll help you ID it, whatever. And it's, and then you also mentioned the part about making it so that the captive propagation eliminates the need for or eliminates the viability of sort of the extractive model of importation, right?
Reduces it greatly. That would be a vision that I would have.
Yeah, same. I align with that particular vision as well, because I would, in an ideal world, I'd love to see a great deal of technology put into making our biosphere as healthy and abundant as possible, and to see herpetoculture benefit from that in such a way that we could implement what Philippe de Vosgely talks about all the time, which is that from few many philosophy, right? I was actually just recently speaking with my friend Travis over here at 5280 Reptile near me, where we were talking about, I don't know why there's not, well, I guess I know why there's not, but I would love to see a I could. It doesn't take much imagination, I think, to envision an importation structure that is much more boutique and well defined. Like I could see a business that has sort of like a quarterly model where once a quarter they bring in 30 to 50 representatives of fully legal and legitimate species, which 30 to 50 is nothing, right? But
Mm-hmm.
bring them in, give them veterinary attention, maintain them in your space until you know that, however many that are going to make it through are out of the woods. You're obviously seeking 100%. But if you average at 90, that's probably across many years, that's probably pretty good. And you say, all right, these things are going to only be sold to, they're only going to be sold in pairs or breeding groups. They're only going to be sold to breeding homes. They're not going to be cheap, but we only have 30 to 50 of them, right? And you do that. I feel like you do that once a quarter, and all of a sudden, uh, it becomes something difficult to compete with. I think it bothers me deeply that there are so many ball pythons that still get imported from Ghana and Togo. It's like that is just completely. It's not just unnecessary, but it's just a bummer. Like it really hurts to see that at least on the scale that it's done with that particular species. You mentioned the problem of you have people who say, oh, only buy captive bred animals. And I agree with that sentiment to an extent. Like, of course, if there's a wild caught animal there, well, that thing still deserves a great home and
Sure, absolutely,
a dignified existence, right? I know
right.
you feel the same way, but I think one of the big hurdles that stands in the way of that particular goal is that all of these importer exporters and resellers and wholesalers label their animals as captive bred.
Yeah.
I mean, and they're not. They'll try to skirt it with farm bred or something like this. And I tend to scoff at the. I have my as I've joked before in the podcast, like I have my libertarian leanings where I'm not as interested in a lot of bureaucracy and regulation, but to me it wouldn't be that it doesn't seem that obscure to say, well, we're going to have this governing body that says if you have to have proof that these things are captive bred somewhere in the country or in Europe, like actual proof to even put that label on them on an ad.
Mm-hmm.
I wish so deeply that there was some verification or vetting process in that, because I have people message me constantly every single day who say, I bought this Euro, he's captive bred. What's going on? And it's clearly a wild caught animal, and there's just so many layers of there's you can peel back every layer of the onion as far as it goes to realize, oh, once I talk them through the logic and the rationale behind how I can tell is not captive bred just by looking at it. Well, then they're like, oh no. And it's like, no, 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 no. This was not intended to put you down. This was just intended to give you the understanding to carry forward. Like this animal is going to need a different kind of attention
Mm-hmm.
compared to a captive bred one. And now in the future, you might make that decision in a different way, knowing that most of these wholesalers and retail outlets are not giving you truthful feedback. I mean, I'm curious what thoughts you have on that, if any.
Well, there's a lot of honorable people in the business,
Mm-hmm.
and I do believe that some people do not intentionally misrepresent animals. They think it
Totally.
because they were told that.
Right.
And so they bought them in quantity and they tried to sell them. And it isn't an area of real expertise in them to tell a wild caught from a captive born.
Absolutely.
I mean, when you go to these tables and there's adult uri that are not looking really good, Saharan,
Yeah.
and not looking really good, and you see them in, you go, you're pretty clear on those that they're, wild caught.
Oh yeah.
Does that mean that somebody that volunteered to help that person who doesn't know anything about the origins of those animals, just there to help out for the day, doesn't give wrong information? I see it a lot. I mean, that's even in some of these big pet stores.
Yeah.
They're well intentioned, but they're misinformed. It isn't that they're trying to, they have no stake in it that they need to deceive you. But,
Sure.
You kind of look at that and go, I'm pretty sure that one's wild caught.
Sure. Yeah.
But So yeah, I mean, I don't know what the answer to it is. The industry kind of polices itself by people becoming more knowledgeable. And like I said, wild caught animals are good to bring in new genetics into a population over time.
Absolutely.
And like you said, what you said, 30 or 50 animals coming in. Sometimes if you have well-established breeding colonies and you want to add a little biological diversity to them, that would be good. But then that depends a lot. The state of the situation that we're in now, where, as you've probably heard, a lot of people say we're in the sixth extinction. Um, and this one is caused by humans because we've altered the planet dramatically. And the biggest loss to wildlife is loss of habitat, period. Plain and simple. It's habitat loss. You can't have a deer, you can't have a Eurymastix in the wild unless you have their habitat. So that's the highest priority. And as a lot of nations see the impact of degradation of habitat and then maybe over collection, not doing collections in a sustainable way. I don't know how different countries manage it. Australia has very restrictive. Nothing gets exported from Australia. That's their way. That's their way of dealing with things. And so I think we're going to find as time goes on and populations continue to decline and habitats lost, I think governments are going to start putting more blocks on exportation.
Totally.
And I hope where these Eurymastix are coming from, there's some sustainable number that is allowed in and out. But you don't know. When people go out, they collect animals as they find them. And you can have, if you're really having an intense collection in a certain area, you could greatly reduce the population. Sure, given enough time, neighboring populations might move in. But it's just like in wildlife management. They only, for hunters, there's only so many elk, so many deer that are allowed to be hunted each year because they do surveys. They find out what the population level is. They have models that tell you how many deer or elk this part of the world can support. And there's also political reasons determining numbers. If animals are causing agricultural damage, they might have higher extraction numbers there.
Right.
So in the other field of wildlife, there seems to be a lot of efforts to go to manage populations in a sustainable way. And I don't know if that is being done in the world in reptiles. As a matter of fact, I don't know anything about the other animal industries, but I'm not sure the other importation people bring in as much animals as the reptile community. Maybe the fish people do it. And see, now I'm getting out of my realm. I don't know anything. I know a little bit about tropical fish. I had a couple aquariums growing up, but I know nothing about the world of tropical fish like I know about the world of reptiles, which if I walked into it, things would be really different. So I don't know how you do that. We have CITES, which governs the protection of animals that have been declared rare or endangered, or at least there's different levels of protection. Some are not endangered, but they're concerned about their populations going down and declining, but they haven't reached that point where they would be put onto an endangered species list. So I know all Eurymastix, going back to our favorite animal, come from or protected by CITES. You have to get papers and bring them into the United States. The papers have to show they came from the country of origin legally. So there's different rules, but so I don't know what the long-term answer to that is. I just know policy. We have lots of great ideas in policy of how to make things better, but implementing policy is really challenging. And one thing when I've been mentored other biologists in my career, I said political might will always outdo biological right. I mean, in other words, I can know as a conservation biologist what I should do to protect habitat that's beneficial, from insects to reptiles to birds to deer to mammals to bears. I can tell you what needs to be done, maybe give you ideas how big a habitat is needed for those species. But then the politics come in. The politics come into the economics of it, the restrictions that causes on people. And so that game plays out and is as a matter of fact, to make a point how important politics is in environmental conservation, I went back to school at the University of Arizona part-time. I was a student at working on another degree, and I minored in political science because I didn't really understand that world, but it affected everything that I was trying to do, on protecting habitats, or, what should be done, what kind of rules or policies should be developed. You take in the economics. It's not a pure world of just, I want to do what's best for animals. You're going to have a lot of other people that have different views of what that means to them.
Yeah. I think that's pretty spot on. I mean, I feel like that's part of where this concept for that, more boutique style importation operation kind of comes from, because I think it would be easier to try to outcompete the kind of import, the sort of extractive import export model, than it would be to try to regulate it into compliance.
Right.
It seems like a more viable path forward, at least on some level, and especially now, the further I go into this world, and the more goals that I try to accumulate inside of herpetoculture, the more it seems like, all right, I probably just have to do it, like it's probably just something I have to do, on some level. But I'd like to get a little bit granular for a bit on uromastics, if you don't mind. So specifically, I'd be curious to know, given, so what was it about uromastics that captured you in the first place? What was it that made them stand out to you? And then, on top of that, what were some of the methods that you used to reverse engineer or sort of discover some of their care methodology early on, when there was no information about them?
There were bits and pieces of information out there because I did a literature search and found people in Europe that had been breeding some of them. So that gave me an understanding to start with. Now, why? That's a memory that I can't capture, but I'm pretty sure it had to do with Moroccan uromastics, which I eventually went to Morocco and saw them in the wild and saw what kind of habitat they lived in, and go, can they survive in that?
How did they even do it?
How do they even do it? Yeah. I got a picture of a piece of their habitat in that book you pulled up that I took when I was over in Morocco. Yeah. But I think it was probably like being at a candy store. It was bright red or bright yellow, whichever one. And I was like, just like, I want that doggy in the window, because it just attracted me because it was so pretty. Yeah. So I got those, and then I sort of, personality-wise, oh, well, if I can do this, then I start seeing these other uromastics coming to the United States for the first time, like ornates, which were coming in pretty big at the time. And then the mollies, I remember the person that I wrote an article in Reptiles Magazine, a picture of him in the desert with some local people digging up these molly uromastics. Yeah. I published that in one of the magazine to show where their habitat they came from. And so they first came to the United States, and he let me know, and I got onto that bandwagon and started working with mollies. So I think it must have been the colors of the first uromastics. And I like desert lizards. I've spent a lot of time, I live in a desert now, but I didn't growing up. But whenever I drove, I went out to the Great Basin Desert and then into the Mojave Desert. So I spent a lot of my latter teenage years and 20s, camping out and chasing reptiles around the desert. So there was probably an attraction of that. They were desert animals like chuckwallas, similar to chuckwallas in some ways. And by the way, I treated chuckwallas, which I bred to, and uromastics pretty much the same. I just mixed up a giant bowl of salad. And I also was breeding bearded dragons, and they would get the same salad. So that would be the one thing when I traveled for a week, because I was gone many, many weeks each year traveling around the country for work. Sure. I would make up a big salad, and my wife would spoon it out to my animals when I was gone. I heard about brumation. I think the word we used more often back then was hibernation. But I heard about, So this was in Texas, which gets pretty cold winters, and I had my whole garage was converted into a lizard facility, and it's used
with stock tanks, right?
With stock tanks, 2-story stock tanks.
They're in the book.
Yeah, they're in the book. And I had a welder make me racks to stack up those stock tanks.
Yeah.
And to me, so it was simple. And then I heard about brumation, so I just said, well, I'll just turn the heat lamps off during the
Yeah.
winter. And I did that, and it seemed to be successful with a lot of breeding going on the
Oh
following
yeah.
year.
Oh yeah.
I was first hearing about this in the early 90s, about this idea of UVB light and calcium and all these absorptions, and that it was needed for the vitamins. And we
Mm.
started putting vitamin D3 into calcium supplements and sprinkling it on my salads that I was feeding the
Yep.
lizards. And I remember I heard about these new things called Vitalite,
Yeah.
which were the original UVB lights. And
Yeah.
I don't know how we didn't have, at least I didn't have solar meters to tell you how much UVB they were producing. And I would put them, just lean them across the top of the stock tank. Maybe they were too far above the lizard. I had no way to monitor or to figure out if
Yeah.
that made a difference for the lizard or if I was giving them the right UVB. But either way, the animals lived well and survived. And I like to hope to think that I was giving them some UVB light.
Yeah.
So it was just the things I just discovered. But I fed pretty much all my Uromassic species that I worked with the same diet.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have tables that told me which things might produce chemicals in the lizard that would suppress the ability to absorb calcium, with some of the things that you read now. Things I hear a lot about spinach. I didn't know that about spinach, and I fed a lot of spinach. I didn't. If it was leafy and it was green, I fed it.
Yeah.
And at that time, I lived in Texas, and like where you live, I was able to harvest a lot of dandelions.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not so much here in the desert.
Sure. Yeah, but you got other stuff.
I can get dandelions greens, but I can't get the flowers.
Yeah. But you get in New Mexico and in the Southwest, you get other stuff that any of the things the wild chucks are eating, I would assume would be good.
Yeah.
So maybe you can't get dandelions or bindweed, but you can get some of that whatever, the Chuckwalla Delight or whatever that they snack on. I can't remember what the name of the plant is, but yeah, I believe if my research is correct, I think the first UVB light was put out by ZooMed in like 95, something along those lines. So that, I think that was the Vitalite, right? That had to be the...
I don't know. Is that the history ZooMed was developing the Vitalite? Okay.
I might be incorrect about that. Because it can be challenging, especially in herpetoculture. It can be really challenging to verify some of that early stuff, just because just conflicting information and whatnot. So with regard to getting some of these early shipments, and kind of hearing about D3 and hearing about UV lighting, and then hearing about maybe like feeding them seeds and things like this. And I'm sure at the time you were corresponding with other individuals like Douglas Dix and Audrey van der Linden and
Lindsay Pike's another one.
Lindsay. Oh, dude. I have so many stories of calling up Lindsay Pike in the early 2000s and just annoying the hell out of him as a 16, 17-year-old kid. And he was one of the first people who told me, he was like, well, you got to think about where these guys come from. Like half of their native range are conflict zones with no functioning government or conservation in place. And that blew my mind. Like it just never even occurred to me that was in the cards. I couldn't believe it. I gotta get him on the show too. He'd be an interesting gentleman to speak to. But so you were corresponding with them. You were talking with a few of these breeders that had been doing it in Europe, and you had maybe read some of the stuff that they had written. But were there any? Were the first several times you tried to breed them, did it just work out okay, or did you face any significant hurdles that you had to overcome in doing it?
No, I remember I got the animals. Pretty much most of them bred the following year when I got them. I got them when I first got them, making sure they're healthy and up to speed. Giving them the nutrition they needed to give them. They did some parasite work. I mean, there weren't veterinarians, though I know some now because when they were in graduate school at Davis, I met several of the well-known herp people, vets around the country right now, but there weren't exotic veterinarians around. And quite frankly, I probably knew as much or more than a lot of the veterinarians because I knew nothing about all the other animals and medical issues they did. But it was not a lot known. I would go back one other. I put together a workshop for Fred Fry. He was one of the first reptile veterinarians. Wrote a whole book on it. I don't even know if it's still used in text, but I put a day's workshop on with him coming in, and so I got to know him. He wrote a few books. So reptile medicine was very limited, but I did hear about parasites. My understanding of parasites, and I wish I'd like to talk to some parasitologists now, is that when lizards come in with your parasites, well, the lizards probably always had the parasites.
Yeah.
What happens is their immune system drops down and they can't fight them. They start to overtake and their body loses the battle. As a matter of fact, I've often wondered, well, do those parasites actually do some good in the gut? Like biomes, just like us. The big rage now is getting your stomach bacteria and whatever lives down there healthy, and it helps you out with a lot of things. So we learn more and more and more all the time. So did I lose some captive animals and come in? Yes. I mean, the wild caught, because I couldn't bring them back. But once they responded and got to eating, and then that cooled them down for a few months during the winter, which was also nice, gave me a break from feeding animals every day.
Yeah, tell me about that.
So you get a little bit of break when they go into brumation. And I wouldn't say I had a real strategy. I just had knowledge from, as you do. I can go look at an animal because I've been around them my whole life, and I can get a feeling that it's okay.
Yeah.
It's not doing okay. I'm a little worried about this one. I haven't seen him eat regularly. Is it showing up and losing weight? You start to get that second nature feeling being around animals your whole life. And I just think it was all of the knowledge that I was given through all the conferences that I helped put together and saw really amazing people talk about it. Of course, most of the stuff you hear in the conferences was about snakes. They were and still way ahead on the curve of getting the husbandry down for snakes and doing great jobs with that. And I think, lizards are in the same way. There is great, like you have great success, as well as maybe there's 3 or 4 other big Uromastic breeders in the country like that. I'm not really sure. Of course, there's a lot of mom and pop places, just at home doing it. And that's all great. That's wonderful stuff. So it was just trial and error. And I can't really remember anything that stood out as didn't work for me.
Okay.
I don't have that path written down. I can think of other animals I had before I was into breeding that came into this country way back when, that I had no clue how to take care of. I remember having my first veiled chameleon. I didn't know exactly what to do with it. And so I had to do a lot of research. But I had one advantage because I'm a biologist. I knew how to research the scientific literature a little bit better. And of course, now with Google and Google Scholar and stuff, anybody can reach out there and do it now. But back in the day, there weren't a lot of things written or published about husbandry of animals. I mean, it was just word of voice. Like when I met Bert Langworth, was a house guest of mine in the very early 1980s. And I think he was still in the Netherlands then. He hadn't moved. I think he moved out to the Canary Islands for a while before he came to the United States. Can't remember that timeline. I have this book. I could review that again and find out his history. But I learned things from Bert because he bred a lot of different lizards. And so it was just accumulation of knowledge, like a snowball rolling through life, learning from other people, learning from that animal seems a lot healthier. Like, nobody told me what temperature to keep Uromastics at.
Sure.
I just figured, well, they're desert lizards, must be hot. Now, whether it should be 115 degrees or 125 degrees in their basking spot, I don't know. I still don't know to this day. I know a lot of us have opinions of what it should be, but I'm not. They seem to. So it's based upon they seem to bask there. They must like that 115. It seems like a good thing. So I think those are just little things that I think most people that get into reptile keeping or animal keeping of any start to know their animal. It doesn't mean you're a know-it-all, but I mean, I probably learn something every day I turn on my computer,
Oh
right?
yeah.
And I go, huh, we didn't do it that way back in the day. I noticed somebody recently posted on Facebook that some people are making it overcomplicated how to take care of a reptile. Making it too like it's intimidating when you read what you're supposed to do and all this micromanagement.
Yeah.
Um, and he says, I wonder why we had success before we did all those things.
Yeah. That's a funny way to put it. Yeah. I mean, there's something you said there that I love the talk about how you develop a real sense, a second nature sense for what's going on with them. I mean, there's a lot of pressure when you're putting out care information, especially when you have customers. There's a lot of pressure to have a clear answer. So like a good example that I can think of off the top of my head is someone will ask, well, at what size is a female ornate Eurymastix like ready to breed?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, I have no idea. I don't have any idea how to answer that question. And some of that's because number one, I don't have the requisite equipment to examine the physiology of the animal to make that determination for, in the first place. But additionally, I don't agree with the concept that there's a threshold at which, like a gram weight and age threshold that as soon as they cross that threshold, now it's okay. And then previous to that, it's a problem. It's like there's not enough information. I know for a clear fact that Audrey Vanderlinden, the reason there's a hypo ornate Eurymastix in the first place is because Audrey was raising a group of ornates that she had produced together, and at a little over a year old, a pair of them mated and produced a viable clutch of eggs.
Uh-huh.
Sure, there's a conversation to be had around whether or not in the wild they would have achieved that same size and weight as quickly. Maybe they did, maybe they didn't. There's an argument to be made around sort of the things that happen when you alter an animal sufficiently that it is drifting towards a domestic creature. Things change. I personally, in my experience, I've had animals as young as 2 years old reproduce, no problem. I've had some take 5 years to reach reproductive viability. But it's never been something that I put on them. It was always something that I let them make the decision. So because everything was kept solo, I don't really keep pairs together. So, if I would pair an animal in the spring and they reproduced, well, my guess is they know better than I do if they're ready,
Mm-hmm.
So I would just sort of go by what they're telling me. And I think I think that is one area where the added information can conflict with individual progress, because unless you're taking the time to sufficiently observe what you work with to develop that second nature sense for what's going on, it can be really, really difficult to get answers, but you also don't want to rely on those answers too heavily in a way that can prevent you from doing very good work or giving the animals what they need. It's a challenging one. And I just love this, responding to the animals, like letting them kind of take the lead is just such a wonderful way to go forward. They know what they need. They're not stupid. And I mean, but you also have to balance that against, like, for example, I have my son. If I had he hasn't had any candy, of course, he's far too small. But if I were to give him, say, like a Reese's peanut butter cup, he might want to eat that every meal of every day.
I can understand that.
Yeah, fair. I love a Reese's peanut butter cup.
Yeah.
They're delicious, right?
Uh-huh.
But I also know that it's not the best thing for him, right?
Absolutely.
So in the same,
Right.
you have to have the similar frame of mind with your animals. Like, I know that I could probably feed mealworms to my baby Eurymastix every day, and they would love it because they love
Mm-hmm.
mealworms. But it's
Mm-hmm.
probably not the thing to give them all the time.
Right. Right.
This is and it sounds like a lot of that, being responsive in the moment was what kind of led to a lot. It obviously coupled that with your ecological understanding. I think of those two things together were probably the thing that led you to have, call it, a little bit greater ease in in good result. You know. Um, so another question I have for you is, who are some of the people who have been impactful in your early ventures into herpetoculture? I know obviously with someone who's been in it for so long and you know so many people, that list could probably be quite substantial. But I'm guessing there are at least a handful of people who stand out for one reason or another.
Yeah, and they were basically the people I met.
Mm-hmm.
I told you about Robert Stebbins
Mm-hmm.
telling me that maybe pursuing a complete degree only in herpetology wasn't the best career strategy. So I would say he had a huge influence on my life,
Mm-hmm.
led me to the whole path that I followed the next, 60 years after he gave me that advice. So he was a major influence. And he was also a herpetologist, not a herpetoculturalist, but a herpetologist who that was his whole life and his research and so forth. So he had a big influence on me. I think people like Bob Mayu and Bert Langewerf in the very early 80s, when I met both of them, and I had a longer, I saw Bert off and on over the next 10, 15 years, but I was probably more connected with Bob Mayu as far as knowing what he was up to. He'd always come up to the conferences that we had in Davis, and he always brought some great insights into his work that he was starting with. And he wasn't, I don't remember him being into bearded dragons that early on, but in the 80s, but it wasn't early 80s, but soon after that, he started developing them.
Mm-hmm.
Bert Langewerf, Bob Mayu. I think those are the people that influenced me with specific knowledge
Mm-hmm.
of what their work with lizards. I can't point to a single thing that they may have said or done or I emulated from them, but I think it was just their wealth of knowledge and observations and things they said that kind of molded my view of what I needed to do. And to this day, I still, being around somebody that's working with animals, I still learn things because that's the beauty of having so many different people involved. Everybody's looking at things through a slightly different lens.
Mm-hmm.
And putting that information together, it's just like a snowball. It's just slowly accumulated. But
Yeah.
I think those are the people that, I can keep on going. Sean McEwen had a big influence on me,
Mm.
mainly because he always volunteered me to do things.
Yeah.
Write paper, write articles or work on organizing conferences.
Yeah.
He was an inspiration. Ron Tremper, another person I met before he got into the private sector when he was at the zoo.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the people that stand out. And I'm looking back, like I mentioned earlier, in the 70s and 60s, other than Robert Stebbins in the 60s, I didn't know a lot of people in the reptile world.
Mm-hmm.
There was just no connection. And as I mentioned, there was no internet, there was no Facebook, there was no Instagram. At best, you found out about something. I read all the old books by Raymond D. Mars and books that had been written in the 40s and the 50s and had my own collection of books. But once again, there weren't a lot of, you could go get those little publications at the pet store, how to take care of your chameleon.
Mm-hmm.
And by that I mean anoles, not the old world chameleons,
Yeah.
or how to take care of your little turtle. But those were just bits and pieces of information. I wasn't connected to people that were breeding animals, or I don't even know in the 60s and 70s if I really knew anybody that was keeping animals other than me. And I
Mm.
wasn't breeding them at the time. I wasn't trying to get matching pairs and things. I just have a chuckawalla.
Yeah, sure.
Or or something like bluebelly and keep it around. But it was in the 80s when I got to Davis, which was a university town,
Mm-hmm.
and met other people that were going there to be veterinarians but had a strong interest in herpetology, or other people. Another really good friend of mine, the other co-founder, he was majoring in ecology, but he liked reptiles. And you know what? I think I met him. Memory just fired back. I think I met him at some little group of people just were having a swap meet on reptiles. I have a vague memory of that. And I met him there. And then he said, "Hey, I want to form a herpetological society." And he knew I was in Davis. So we began working. Well, that was my doorway into the bigger world of people that spent their lives
I
like
see.
zoo people, or spent a big proportion of their private life, their hobby, or right to people like that were going to the University of California, Davis, that were majoring in medicine, but probably reptiles was always a special thing in their mind. And, like I said, they went on to become some of the well-known reptile doctors of the day. Um, so yeah,
Yeah.
I think it was Davis so that was, what was that, 45 years ago? 45, 46 years ago was sort of when the door began opening to the bigger world.
Okay.
Even though I had been in it my whole life for the first 30 years before that, it wasn't a connected world that I was aware of.
Mm.
But now with Facebook and internet, we all know about all kinds of things going around.
Sure.
I mean,
Sure.
all the different people, different names, what species they're working with.
Do you think so? Something that I'm always really curious about is with those individuals who made an impact, do you think it's just is it primarily just their passion that sets them apart, or is it their creativity and their drive? Because so let me, there's a video on YouTube that I remember seeing years ago, and I think it's still out there. I haven't looked for it in a long time, but there's a video and it's of Burt Langerwerf, and I think it's at a zoo back in the day. He looks like a much younger man in the video. I don't know how old he was at the time, but he's holding a book. He's got a book in his hands, and it's a plant, an illustrated book of plants. And my guess is it's a book of the plants of Morocco. And he opens it up to a page with a little yellow flower on it. And he holds that book up to a big cage full of Moroccan uromastyx. And he watches all the Moroccans come running over and try to eat the illustration. And I have to say, to me, that particular instinct to look for an illustration of a flower that exists in the native range of the animal that you're keeping and to show it to them, that strikes me as absolutely genius on
Oh,
some
yeah.
level. Like that is a level of creative thinking and creative problem solving and information gathering that I think is not that's not you that's very unique, I think. So to me, some of these guys like him and Bob and others, there's a level of yeah, I mean, I don't want to use the term genius super liberally or anything like that, but some kind of inspiration. What do you think about that?
Well, first of all, I'm going to go back to the first word you said,
Yeah.
passion.
Mm.
I've always thought passion was underestimated to what it took to get things done.
Mm.
People, and I'm talking about not just reptile world, I'm talking about in my career and all things in life.
Mm.
I've always inspired by passionate people.
Mm.
I mean, they have, you can feel it. It's sort of contagious. It sort of exudes out of them. So I think the people that I mentioned, they were all passionate.
Mm.
That was what their lives were all about. Being submersed in that world of reptiles. So I think passion is a great, great thing. And then creativeness. Creativeness, like, I know you do art. My father was a painter. He went after World War II. He went to Berkeley School of Arts and Crafts, but he never could make a living in paintings because I was born, and so he had to get another job.
Yeah, sure.
I've always wondered. My father's been gone for 40 some odd years, but I always wonder. I hope he didn't resent me for being born. I didn't feel that, but his career couldn't flower because you had to be a starving artist, right?
Sure.
Artists all start off with making it really difficult. Only a few make it to the big dollar signs.
Yeah, that's right.
But so the creative genius is in lots of different areas, other than herpetology. But those people, they looked at things differently.
Yeah.
And maybe it's because of their passion, and they spent so much of their life in it. When I surf the internet and I see and read something that somebody's doing or see pictures of their reptile rooms, I go, my Lord, how this art hobby has changed from a bunch of aquariums on the floor to, these professionally built reptile rooms with looks like miniature zoos all over the world. And I'm just always amazed by it. And I go, wow, that's creative. I never thought of doing something like that. So I think there are people that stand out that have that creative gift, and whether they apply it in herpetoculture or painting or music or charitable work, to make the world a better place. Passion, I think, is important, and passion rubs off on me. It always has. And now, passion can get you in trouble. You can be overexcited about something and go against the norms, and then you have to figure out how to balance that off. But I like passionate people. I like people that wake up and go, "This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to make it happen," and they do. And it's a beautiful thing to watch, human creativity.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. I love that. I love that sentiment. That's great. Okay, well, so I have, I'd say I've got three or four questions left, and I want to make sure I'm respectful of your time because we're right around an hour 40. So I want to make sure.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I know, and I appreciate it a lot, and so I want to make sure that I'm respectful of your time. And then later today, my wife, here in not too long, my wife and I have to go visit this birth center.
Oh, yeah. Well, good. Well, first of all, to all the people that have stood and stayed this long, I suggest breaking it up and fast forwarding through things that are rambling.
I think you'd be surprised how many people are going to like this is. I really have enjoyed this thoroughly so far, and I think it's really, really valuable. And I think that there are going to be, you'll be amazed at the number of people who not just sit through it, but repeat it more than once to really gain what they can out of it. So, in the spirit of that, I'm curious if you could give yourself advice to yourself 30 years ago. You get that opportunity to teleport back in time and give yourself a one or two pieces of advice. What might that advice look like?
Patience. Things take a while to happen. Don't be disappointed if things don't go. This is like all of life, but I'm talking about herpetoculture. I think it would be patience. 2, control yourself. You don't need to acquire everything and put it in a terrarium, And I think I've learned that to a degree, but you know how it is when you start collecting things, whether it's stamps or coins, sometimes you can get a little carried away.
Get a little carried away, man. I did that with Pokemon cards.
Well, when I was at Tinley, I kept saying to myself, God, if I was 20 years younger and had the space, I'd be going home with lots of different things. Luckily, I don't have those two elements in the future, so I decided, no, you don't need to buy this. I think don't be too obsessed. You don't have to have everything. Work with what's comfortable, and most importantly, work with the number of animals you can take care of. Don't overdo yourself that you neglect things. So pace yourself. And for some people, that means one lizard, and bless you. And I see people on the internet, they love their Uromastyx as much as they love their dog. I think it's a great thing. I think it's just, and they work, I just think that's a beautiful thing that people have that close of a bond with. I think you mentioned one of your talks, E.O. Wilson's term, biophilia. There's some of us that are born with that sense, that awe, that can't do without wild things, outside or here. I mean, my life has been focused. My travels around the world have been mostly guided by I wanted to see some lizards. I've been to Australia 3 times because I wanted to see lizards, and snakes. Snakes are cool too. But I was bird watching. I was doing everything, And I went to Morocco specifically to see the Moroccan Uromastyx. An Englishman that was working on Greek tortoises invited me, and this is because he does research there, and I went with him, and he took me out and all about the Upper Saharan and learned a little bit about that. So my life has always been generated. If you were to look around my house here, my house is dominated with wildlife artwork, sculptures, paintings, stained glass. I even had I have a snake Arizona mountain king snake stained glass window over here that a friend built for me many years ago.
That's amazing.
But so, yeah, passion. Don't be too obsessed. I think I lost track of the. Did I answer your question clear enough?
No, that's perfect. Yeah,
Okay.
that's great. I have two before these last couple of questions. I have a couple of anecdotes I want to share with you. So I did this local expo in Castle Rock, and there was I think it was at the end of, or like it was the spring 2025, maybe end of 2024. I can't remember which, but it was one of these local Castle Rock shows, and there was this young kid it's just like a bunch of people walking through, looking at the stuff on the table, and this one kid who looks like he might have been maybe like 12, maybe 12 years old at best, give or take a couple of years in either direction. And he leans over, he's looking, he's got a Bass Pro Shops hat on, and I'm like, this guy's an angler, that's cool. And he's looking around and he points to one of my delis and he goes, Zena got my tailor eye. And I was like, yep, bingo, and he was like, I love those. That's awesome. Like, and I was like, okay, I'm going to pay attention to you. Like, I'm sure I'm going to see you again. There was something about him where I was like, wow, that was a really enriching thing to see. And then the second one is that there was there's a gal who bought a Euro from me recently, or I haven't shipped it to her yet, but she's getting it for her 12-year-old son. And she mentioned that he is obsessed with reptiles and currently is super obsessed with ornate uromastics. And she's like, he listens to your podcast and he's watched all your YouTube videos and all this stuff. And I'm like, I got to tell you, that is the single coolest aspect of this entire book. I just love that. Like the idea that there's another, you can see these younger kids who you can tell they've got that bug, that disease is never going anywhere. They're going to be involved in herpetoculture for the rest of their lives. That's such a cool thing to see. So, just thought you'd appreciate those things.
Yeah, no, I do.
With that in mind, so one of these last couple questions is, what if you could, like, if there's something, if you take like a broad view on herpetoculture right now as you see it, is there anything about it that you'd like to see change? Anything that you think you'd like to see maybe more movement away from or towards something else?
Well, that is a big question. I think as a hobby, it's gone in the right direction.
Mm-hmm.
And as I mentioned earlier, I'm really pleased with the amount of captive propagation that's going on in the country now. It's just amazing. You always hear about somebody bred this for the first time. And to me, that's exciting. To me, the most exciting thing about herpetoculture was watching an egg hatch.
Oh, yeah.
That was a culmination of everything that you put into it and seeing that egg hatch. And you go, wow, I made the living conditions good enough for this animal that it's healthy enough that it can reproduce. So that's always been sort of a measure of success for me.
Sure.
I don't think everybody needs to or should do to be captive breeders. I think having a great pet that you have named and have a relationship with, and you're teaching your younger children to appreciate biodiversity. Mm-hmm. So hopefully they'll be better citizens. And when the time comes and when they're voting or contributing money or doing something volunteer-wise, excuse me, I just see my computer just told me my battery's getting low. So good thing we're getting close to the end anyway. Sure. Yep. So yeah, I don't want to be judgmental about what should be done differently. I mean, I'm seeing a lot of people being healthy animals at these shows. I saw healthy animals that looked really good, looked beautiful. So I don't really know what I would change.
Okay.
I just want to see more success. And as I go all the way back to the beginning, I like to see us less dependent on wild caught and more embracing of captive bred when we can for the species that we can do that with. I just think that's a good goal. It's an honorable goal to work towards that.
I agree. Yeah, that's great. Well said. Okay, so then the last question, this is the one I try to ask every guest at the end of every show, unless it's maybe like a special special edition or something like that, which is, so why herpetoculture? So why do you think it is that we do this? What do you think it, why? And that can be, feel free to take that as why do you do it, or what, but I think I'd be more interested in the, why do you think this is something that people do?
I think it's the connection we have to the greater the world, all life forms. I don't think we're special species that isolate ourselves. We depend upon other species to survive. For example, pollinators. Without pollinators, we wouldn't have agriculture. Sure. So I think for me, it was just, I liked animals since I could remember, whether it was this feral cat that I brought home or dogs that we had at home. And I had dogs my entire life. And I think there's some of us going back to that biophilia, Edward O. Wilson, or that connection to the outdoors. I think it just gives us a relationship. And people keeping reptiles goes back thousands of years. It is, and the book that Michael Berger's writing, he had a chapter on that, and it was very fascinating to me. But I'll save that for him to discuss if you get him on your thing. But I just think humans have this connection, and it could be dogs, there could be cats, it could be wild horses. People that get really immersed in that part of the world. It could be fish, it could be insects, it could be tarantulas. I've seen them all, and it's just that connection people have with other living things. And I think it's inherent in us because we come from that world. The world I'm living in right now, talking to you on a computer and a nice home with a roof over my head and food in the refrigerator, that's a new advent in human. We've been around 300,000 years, and struggles were pretty tough. And they still are for a lot of people in the world. And we talked about that before. I always try to remember I'm very fortunate when I look around the world and see how other people are suffering.
Sure.
And I can afford the luxury of having a hobby where I have a pet lizard, and other people's in the world that can't. They're worried about food on the table for them and their children.
Right.
A noble need. So I just think we have an innate connection. We lived in that world for hundreds of thousands of years as a species. And we lived, and other animals helped keep us alive, whether we've consumed them or, when we started to get into agriculture 10,000 years ago, we started having sheep or whatever the precursors of sheep were, and we started harvesting the wool and making clothes out of that. So we always have had and still have a connection. We depend on wildlife. Just because you live in a city with asphalt and concrete and stucco walls doesn't mean we're remote. We just have isolated ourselves. But we're still connected to it. Anyway, that's my thought. And I'm not a philosopher, and I'm not a psychologist to understand human nature, but I just know my life is better having spent it all around animals.
That's great. I love that. I think that's a really solid way to wrap this up. So thank you, Randy. I really appreciate the time. And I'm hopeful that this will be just the first of several that we can do. I'd love to do more of this and in the future. So thank you again. And but you're not on any, or you're like, I know you're on Facebook, but you don't have, because you're not really current. You keep some euros right now, right? But there's not like a place I can direct people to see what you're up to, is there?
No, I don't. I probably, the most things I used to do in Facebook, especially when I lived on a ranch, was educate people and put wild pictures of wildlife. I had a lot of rattlesnakes on the ranch where I lived, and I was always photographing them and educating. Some people call my Facebook nature channel, but that was before I moved into the city. I don't have the opportunity to photograph animals like walking out my door and there's a black-tailed rattlesnake coiled up hunting, and I could all of a sudden go on a photo expose of him. So no, I don't. I kind of try to keep quiet, and as a matter of fact, I don't answer very many, if any, questions that people post on Facebook. I let it up to the new generation, the new people that are working, because I learn from them. I learn from people half my age. I learn from you. You've been much more dedicated and involved than I was, because my career was the dominant part of my life. And I loved it, but it was the dominant part of my life. I'd be gone for a week at a time, at least twice a month.
Okay. Well, interesting. Thanks, Randy. Thanks again.
Okay.
Let me stop the recording really fast. Just a moment.